Arthur Williams II is the greatest counterfeiter in America. He forged tens of millions and baffled the FBI for years. Imagine this man got caught with a bag containing $60,000 in counterfeit money. Yet they couldn't convict him, and he slipped right out of their hands. So how did he do that? And how was his stepson, just 15 years old, the reason he ended up in prison? Imagine, the guy the federal money investigators couldn't catch, his stepson exposed him in the dumbest way possible. It's an amazing story, filled with family drama, police investigations, forgery, thefts, and unbelievable events. The story is so exciting, you can't miss it. So grab a snack or a full meal, whatever you like. And for those who haven't subscribed yet, do it now because I always share these crazy stories. And don't forget to hit the like button. Peace. This is Shamsuddin, and today's story is about a man named Arthur Williams II. We'll call him Arthur II for short, because this Arthur is going to have a son and name him Arthur III. A family of Arthurs. Maybe one day they'll reach Arthur 1600. Just kidding. Anyway, Arthur II is considered the greatest counterfeiter America has ever seen. He's the guy who made the most identical copies of the dollar. Arthur got into crime when he was young. His first crime was when he broke into a parking meter to buy things for the house and help his mom. One day, Arthur came home, opened the fridge, and found it empty. He got angry and wondered why they were poor and why their situation was so bad. He stormed out of the house, walked down the street, and saw a parking meter. To let out his anger, he punched the meter with his hand and heard the sound of coins rattling inside. He thought to himself, if I could somehow open this meter, I'd get the money inside. He started messing with the meter, trying to open it, and eventually, he managed to shove a small piece of metal into the meter's lock and kept working at it until he got it open. Once he unlocked it, he took all the coins inside and went to the grocery store to buy stuff for the house. When his mom came home later, she was surprised and asked him, "Where did you get all this stuff, son?" He replied, "Mom, I broke into a parking meter and took the money inside." She responded, "Son, I don't want you stealing money to buy stuff for the house. God will take care of us." He answered, "Mom, God did take care of us. He taught me how to break the meter's lock." The main reason for their financial struggles was that Arthur's dad walked out on them in 1983 when Arthur was only 11 years old. That was one of the biggest shocks of his life. After their dad left, they couldn't pay rent and had to move out of their home, eventually living in a homeless shelter for a while. Literally, their goal at that time was just to survive. After some time, they managed to move into government-subsidized housing, what's called the projects, which are usually rough areas for low-income people that the government rents out cheaply. This was a dark time in Arthur's life, and every time he saw his mom with that tired, hopeless look on her face, his anger toward his dad, who left them in this situation, only grew.
The look on my mom's face of just hopelessness and to see the pain that she endured, I think that's where my anger got. You know, like how could he leave her? How could he leave us? And I hated him for a while.
Of course, the public housing projects they lived in were naturally full of gangs and illegal activities, so Arthur grew up in that environment. He started hanging out with some bad kids, forming a small gang. They'd do little robberies here and there, sometimes stealing from stores, sometimes cars, breaking into parking meters, stuff like that. In 1987, when Arthur turned 15, he met an older guy named Da Vinci. This Da Vinci dude was either one of his mom's friends or maybe even her secret boyfriend. But he was close to the family. One day, the police arrested Arthur after he tried to steal a car, so Da Vinci went to the station, bailed him out, and signed the papers. After they left the station, walking down the street, Da Vinci said to Arthur, "Look, kid, if you want to be a criminal and a thief, you gotta use smarter ways. Forget about these small-time thefts like breaking meters, stealing cars, and robbing stores. That's not gonna get you anywhere. You need something better." Arthur asked, "What's the better thing?" Da Vinci replied, "Come with me, and I'll show you." Da Vinci took Arthur to an old building that looked like a warehouse. They went inside, got into this old elevator, and went down to the basement. In the basement, there was a workshop filled with machines, paper, ink, and other stuff. Arthur walked in, looking around, surprised, and the first thing he noticed was the strong smell of ink. Arthur asked Da Vinci, "What is this place?" Da Vinci replied, "Come here, I'll show you." Da Vinci started working on the machines, pulling out paper, adding ink, and turning on the machines. And soon enough, Arthur realized Da Vinci was printing counterfeit money. Arthur was amazed at what he saw. He was watching money, the paper the whole world fights over, being made right in front of him. Da Vinci started taking Arthur to the workshop every day, teaching him the steps of printing, showing him how to mix colors, how to make templates, and how to number each bill with a different serial number. Arthur loved this work. He loved the vibe and the artistic side of counterfeiting. On top of that, Da Vinci became like a father figure to Arthur, someone he admired and looked up to. And of course, he was happy with the money he was making with each batch they printed. This went on for about a year. Then, suddenly, Da Vinci disappeared. He stopped coming around, and there was no contact. When Arthur went to the workshop, he found the warehouse locked up from the outside, and he couldn't get in without a key. The place was shut down, and Da Vinci had just vanished from his life. Arthur felt like his dad had abandoned him all over again, and it was a really painful feeling for him. Maybe Da Vinci didn't actually leave them. Maybe something happened to him. Arthur knew Da Vinci sold the counterfeit money to gangs, so maybe he got into some trouble, got kidnapped, or even killed. Who knows? The point is, he was completely gone. At that moment, Arthur decided to go back to his old friends and his gang. He went back to stealing again, robbing stores, cars, and other things. The second mistake Arthur made at that time was getting into an affair with a girl, and as a result, he had a child when he was just 17. They named the baby Arthur III. Arthur was determined to take care of this child and be present in his life, unlike how his dad abandoned him. So, he needed to work more to support his son and the mother of his child. Together with his friends, they came up with a new way to make money. They decided to start robbing drug dealers. They'd dress up like cops and use a car that looked like a police car. Since they were from the neighborhood, they knew the drug dealers and what they looked like. Their operation was simple. They'd target people known to be carrying weed, surprise them, jump them, and take the weed and money, pretending to be the police. This wasn't even that unusual at the time, since it was known that plenty of corrupt cops would take the money and drugs for themselves. So, what Arthur and his crew were doing wasn't exactly unheard of. They kept doing this for a while, but then something dangerous happened. One of the drug dealers they tried to rob had his crew nearby, and instead of surrendering, he called his friends, who pulled out their guns and started shooting at Arthur and his gang. Immediately, everyone in the gang ran in different directions. Arthur kept running, hearing bullets whizzing past him until one hit him in the leg, and he collapsed. He started losing consciousness from the blood loss and felt like these were his last moments. But he woke up later to find himself in a hospital bed. He realized the gang didn't kill him. They just left him to bleed out until the ambulance came and saved him. This was a terrifying experience for Arthur. he survived death by a miracle. After that, he decided it was time to leave Chicago and move to Texas. But that decision meant leaving his son and the boy's mother behind, abandoning them just like his dad did to him. Still, Arthur was scared and didn't feel safe in Chicago, so he left for Texas in 1993. There, Arthur tried to live a clean life, taking on tough jobs that paid little. But he stuck with it and tried to change himself, deciding to leave his criminal past behind. During this time, he met a woman named Natalie, and he fell in love with her, and she felt the same. Over time, their relationship grew, and Arthur proposed to Natalie, and they got married. Arthur felt so safe with her that he told her about his past, about the thefts, the counterfeiting, everything. And instead of being turned off and saying, "You're a criminal and a forger," she told him, "You're my dream man." His criminal past made her admire him even more, and she started trying to convince him to get back into counterfeiting. She said, "If you were that skilled when you worked with Da Vinci, why not go back to it? We'll get rich, and our lives will get better." When Arthur heard this from her, he was convinced and excited, especially since his wife was supporting him in it. So he started planning the counterfeiting operation, bought machines, found a printing place, and started getting back the skills he learned from Da Vinci during that year he spent with him. He began running tests and printing, always aiming for perfection. Arthur started printing small amounts of counterfeit money because the biggest challenge wasn't the printing itself, but getting rid of the money. Even if the counterfeit money was hard to tell apart from real bills, moving it was always risky. So, Arthur was careful with how he spent it, something he learned from Da Vinci. He planned to gradually increase the amount over time, but the most important thing at first was making sure everything was going smoothly, and that the counterfeit money was indistinguishable from the real thing. But in 1996, Arthur and Natalie were hit with an unpleasant surprise. The U.S. government released a new version of the $100 bill. The new version included several security features that made it way more complex than the previous one, making counterfeiting much harder. Among these features were the watermark that appeared when the bill was held up to the light, and the ink that changed color when the bill was tilted or viewed from different angles. It also had a security strip that turned pink under UV light, along with the Federal Reserve seal and microprinting in certain areas of the bill. All of these features made it incredibly difficult to replicate the currency. This new version was released to combat counterfeiting. It was supposed to be a barrier for everyone, but Arthur wasn't discouraged. On the contrary, he saw it as a challenge. Sure, this was a whole new level compared to what he'd learned from Da Vinci, but he saw it as the perfect time to sharpen his skills and outdo himself. With the rise of computers and design software, especially Photoshop, which was a revolutionary new tool at the time, Arthur was able to use these digital technologies to counterfeit money. But before they could start designing and printing, the first thing they needed was paper that matched the Federal Reserve paper. Any cashier could easily check bills using a special pen, drawing a line on the bill. If the paper was legit, the line would turn yellow, but if it was just regular paper, the line would turn brown. This was one of the new security features achieved through chemicals in the paper manufacturing process. The problem was that this paper wasn't available to the public. It was a blend of cotton, linen, and some chemicals and glue. Arthur and Natalie started ordering paper from all over the world, testing different types of paper to find one that was close to the $100 bill paper. But all their attempts failed. The line always turned brown, which frustrated Arthur. Natalie started yelling at him, saying, "You can't give up now." She grabbed the biggest book near her, which happened to be a phone book, and waved it at him like she was threatening him. Then she threw it on the table, grabbed the pen, and drew a line on the phone book. And to their surprise, the line turned yellow. They both stared at each other in shock, before bursting into excitement. They tracked down the company that printed the phone book, and Natalie contacted them, pretending to be a teacher who needed the paper for a project. The company agreed without hesitation, allowing her to get as much paper as she needed because, of course, they had no idea their paper was going to be used for counterfeiting money. When the paper arrived, Arthur was blown away by how perfect it was. When two sheets were stacked on top of each other, the thickness was very similar to real currency paper. That's when Arthur told Natalie, "We can put the watermark and the security strip between the two sheets." And just like that, they solved the problem of the paper, the watermark, and the security strip. The only major problem left was the color-changing ink. One day, Arthur was walking around when he saw a car painted with a color that shifted between purple and green, just like how the $100 bill did. He contacted the company that made the paint and found out they were the same company that made the ink for the government to use in printing money. What a discovery! They had found the source. Now they had everything: the paper, the ink, and the design. All that was left was the printing. But printing itself required special equipment. Arthur knew that the color of the $100 bill was closer to a creamy green, and this color couldn't be produced by regular printers like laser printers. It required printing with a press, and each sheet had to go through the machine several times to get the right color. And so they began printing with the ink and watermark. They add the security strip, then press the bill for the first time. After that, they add the portrait in the middle and the border, pressing it a second time. Finally, they place the seal, the serial number, and the rest of the details, and press it for the third time. They even had a program designed to automatically change the serial number for each bill. As you can see, Arthur truly earned his title as the greatest counterfeiter in America, maybe even the world. Once Arthur and Natalie perfected the process, the results were incredible. The counterfeit bills were virtually indistinguishable from real $100 bills. Natalie decided to test one out herself. She went to a small store, bought something simple worth $10, and handed the cashier a $100 bill, expecting to get $90 in real money as change. The first thing the cashier did was take out the pen and draw a line on the bill. It turned yellow. He held the bill, flipped it over, and noticed the color-shifting ink. He held it up to the light and saw the watermark clearly. Convinced it was real, he accepted the bill, put it in the cash register, and gave Natalie $90 in genuine money. Natalie walked out of the store feeling thrilled. From that moment, Arthur knew these counterfeit bills would take them to a whole new level. They started printing large amounts of fake money, around $50,000 a month. But they were cautious about how they spent it. Even though the bills were expertly counterfeited, they still took precautions. For about a year and a half, they moved from place to place, printing money and circulating it in one area before moving on to the next. When I say circulating money, I don't mean they were just passing it around. They were laundering the money. For example, they'd take a $100 bill, buy something worth $5 or $10, and get the rest, about $90 in real money. That's how they built their wealth. For two people in their early 20s, Arthur was 23 and Natalie was 22, it felt like a dream life. They were free to do whatever they wanted, continuing to expand their operation and print more money, sometimes producing as much as $30,000 in a single day. It got to the point where they didn't even know what to buy with all the money. They started buying baby clothes, diapers, toys, and other things like that, then donating them to charities. They found happiness in helping those in need. Years went by, and then came the year 2000. Eventually, Arthur returned to his hometown, Chicago. Of course, Natalie came with him. Over the years, Arthur had been financially supporting his son and his son's mother, but he hadn't seen his son during that time. By now, his son was 10 years old. When the boy saw his long-absent father suddenly come back into his life, taking him out and buying him toys and things, he started to bond with Arthur, and their relationship grew stronger. At the same time, Arthur reconnected with his old crew, the friends he used to pull heists with. Right away, he told them about his new line of work, counterfeiting money. When he showed them the bills, they were blown away, unable to tell the difference between the fake bills and the real ones. Of course, Arthur wasn't telling his friends just to brag. He wanted to bring them into the operation to help him, because he was printing way more money than he could spend by himself. Some of these friends had connections with big restaurants, nightclubs, and casinos, so they were able to spread the fake money around these places, and sure enough, it got everywhere without anyone suspecting a thing. Even the FBI didn't catch on to it. The counterfeit bills were so professionally done that they were considered the best fake dollars in the entire market. And although a large amount of Arthur's money was already circulating, the amount he could print was way more. That's when Arthur decided to start dealing with gangs. It was much easier to take $100,000 of fake cash and sell it to a gang for $30,000 than to try to pass it and launder it all himself. That's how Arthur started selling his counterfeit money to gangs. But as he started working with these groups, he realized he'd entered a dangerous world, and he had to stay cautious and on edge all the time. He was dealing with people who could end his life in an instant if they wanted to, from Russian and Italian mafias to other figures in the criminal underworld. So Arthur became paranoid about everything, always watching his surroundings. Any room he entered, he'd sweep it with devices to check for bugs or hidden microphones. And any meeting he went to, he'd bring a scanner and insist on searching anyone he met with. He wasn't willing to take any chances that someone might be wearing a wire. Arthur kept living like this, and years passed until 2002 rolled around. One day, he got an invitation from one of the Russian gangs he was working with to attend a party. The party, of course, was filled with illegal stuff like weed and drugs, and Arthur was carrying a stash of counterfeit bills that he was supposed to deliver to the Russian gang. The party was in a nightclub at a fancy hotel, and there were a lot of people there, not just from the gang, but also regular guests and hotel staff. Many noticed the weed, drugs, and other illegal things. The gang had booked several rooms in the hotel, one of which was assigned to Arthur. Arthur went up to his room to take a break, and with him was a bag containing about $60,000 of counterfeit money, along with some weed as a gift from his Russian buddies. About half an hour later, there was a loud knock on the door and a voice shouting from behind it, "Police! Open up!" It seemed someone at the nightclub, or maybe one of the workers, had tipped off the cops. Arthur got up and opened the door, and immediately the police stormed in with their guns drawn. They started asking him about drugs, and he told them he didn't have any, but there was a little weed on the table next to the bed. The cops began searching the room, and of course, they found the bag with the $60,000. At that moment, Arthur's heart started racing, and, to his bad luck, one of the officers was an expert in money. At first, the police thought the cash was from drug dealing, but when the officer pulled out the bills and started counting, he said, "Something feels off about this money." That's when Arthur knew the end was near, and he was arrested. They took the weed and the money as evidence. Arthur thought it was over, because the police would quickly figure out that the money was fake, and that was, of course, a federal crime way bigger than drug possession. When the investigation started, Arthur got a lawyer. The lawyer came and looked at the police report, which said that when they busted in, the door was open and they saw the weed on the table next to the bed. which was what gave them cause to enter and search the room. Arthur told the lawyer, "No, that's impossible. They couldn't have seen the weed from outside. The hallway's way too long, and there's no way someone standing at the door could see the table by the bed. Unless he's Superman and can see through walls, there's no way they could have seen inside the room." The lawyer asked the judge to dismiss the case on the grounds that the search was illegal from the start, since the police entering a private hotel room either needs a search warrant or a valid reason. The reason the police gave in the report was that they saw weed on the table, which made them enter the room. It was proven that this wasn't true, and that it was impossible for them to have seen it. So the judge ruled that the entire case was void because the search was illegal. Imagine that. Arthur just walked out, even though they caught him with $60,000 of counterfeit money. But of course, after he got out, his paranoia got 1,000 times worse. He was already obsessed with searching everyone he met out of fear of being caught. But now he knew that the FBI would have their eyes on him. Sure, he got away with this case, but now they knew he was a counterfeiter, or at least that he had counterfeit money, so it was certain he'd be under surveillance. From that point, Arthur decided to shut down all his printing operations and cut ties with the gangs and everyone else. Still, he was constantly living in fear of everything and felt like he needed something new to change his life. He started trying to track down his father, who had abandoned him and his mom when he was 11 years old. After some searching, he found someone with his father's name living in Alaska, a place far away from them. He wrote him a letter and mailed it, and his father responded with a phone call. They talked for about an hour and then decided to meet up. Arthur booked a flight and flew to Alaska, and the moment he saw his dad, he felt a huge sense of joy. After all, it was his father. But at the same time, he had this inner anger, a weird mix of emotions. He was still burned by the fact that his dad had left him and his mom to struggle alone. Over the next few days, Arthur and his dad kept talking, sharing stories about their lives. His dad kept apologizing, saying that when he left them, he was going through a tough time and dealing with a lot of mental issues. These talks brought them closer together, and Arthur started to feel what it was like to have a father again. Feeling so close and comfortable with his dad, Arthur got excited and decided to tell him about the counterfeit money he used to print. His dad was a good listener and seemed really interested in the whole thing. Imagine this. Not even a day after that story, Arthur's dad came to him and said, "Son, things are a bit tough for me right now, and work has been tiring lately. Do you think you could help me by printing some money to get me back on my feet?" Arthur was shocked and said, "Did you even hear me? I was almost thrown in jail." His dad replied, "Son, this is a talent. It's a gift from God, and you don't turn away a blessing. Your father needs you, and trust me, I'll help you. We're out here in the middle of nowhere. Nobody knows about this place." Arthur started thinking about it. He was scared, but at the same time, he wanted to make his dad proud of him. So in the end, he decided to go back to printing money again, all for the sake of the father who had abandoned him and left him and his mom to suffer in poverty. Life's really strange sometimes. Arthur had stashed away some paper and printing machines in a storage unit back in Chicago, so he asked his friends to ship them to Alaska. The equipment arrived, and Arthur and his dad started setting up the printing workshop. This whole experience brought them even closer. Arthur was happy to be showing his dad his skills, and he was proud of the level he had reached. Working alongside his dad gave him a huge sense of joy. But even so, not all his tools were available, so the results this time weren't as good as before. They weren't terrible, but the quality was lower than the bills Arthur used to print. He told his dad that they had to keep this a secret, and that the bills needed to be tested before they used them. His dad seemed to understand, but he did the exact opposite of what Arthur had asked. The first thing his dad did was tell his new wife, Anise, about it, then gave her $3,000 to spend and launder. Anise, in turn, gave some of the money to a couple who lived next door, people she knew were involved in money laundering. And the dumbest part? All of these people, when they saw the bills in their hands and felt how real they seemed, decided not to launder them. They said, "This money's perfect. No one will know it's fake." These idiots started spending the money freely, without even trying to exchange it for real cash. The whole crew, the dad, the wife, and the neighbors, were a bunch of fools. Arthur, though he didn't know what was going on, started to notice his dad acting weird. When he asked about the money they had and where it went, his dad would dodge the question and avoid giving him a straight answer. When Arthur saw what was happening, he knew something was wrong, so he decided to leave Alaska right away. He told his dad, "Dad, I feel like what we're doing is wrong, and I'm not comfortable with it, so I'm leaving." His dad responded, "Son, I wish you all the best in whatever makes you happy. I'll be here if you ever want to reach out." Of course, his dad now knew how to print the money and could keep going on his own. Anyway, Arthur left Alaska, and that turned out to be the right move at the right time, because the couple Anise had given the money to were spending it freely. When they went to a store to buy something and tried to pay with the counterfeit cash, the cashier took one look at the bills and immediately knew they were fake. They called the cops, and the couple got arrested. The police turned them into informants to help take down the bigger fish, the one printing the fake money. In the end, they managed to arrest Arthur's dad and his wife, Anise. They got caught thanks to a recorded call with their neighbors, where they confessed all the details about the counterfeiting. Imagine, when the investigation started, Anise broke down and spilled everything, admitting that Arthur was involved too. Arthur, who had gone back to his wife Natalie in Texas, was shocked when the FBI and the SWAT team stormed his house. But because Arthur was careful, he didn't keep anything at home. The only thing he had left was a stash of counterfeit money buried in plastic containers in a forest somewhere. Still, Arthur got arrested anyway, thanks to his stepmother Anise's testimony. In the end, after the trial, his dad was sentenced to 5 years, and Arthur only got 3. You might wonder how Arthur, the mastermind, got less time than his dad. The reason was his dad was caught red-handed in the act, running the operation when they nabbed him, whereas Arthur was convicted based on Anise's testimony. Of course, Anise walked free, as did the neighbors, since they cooperated and gave confessions. Arthur went to jail in 2002, serving 2.5 years, and that time was one of the hardest in his life. First, because he was away from his daughter, and second, because his wife Natalie decided to leave him, saying she couldn't handle the situation anymore. The time he spent in prison made him reflect on his life and how he ended up there. Eventually, he decided he was going to leave the criminal world for good this time. He was counting the days until his release, ready to start fresh. But on the day he got out, something happened that he never expected.
On the day that I got out, my father died in prison. I'll never forget that day. I woke up that morning, I'm packing all my stuff, going home. It was tough. It was real tough.
His dad died in prison. That day was incredibly tough for Arthur, as he felt like he had no one left in this world but his son, Arthur III. Arthur went back to Chicago in 2004 to be close to his son, who was 15 at the time and right in the middle of his teenage years. He started trying to pick up the pieces of his life and find work. Every job he took was hard. Part-time waiter at a restaurant, cleaning bathrooms, and they barely paid. On top of that, none of the jobs were stable. They were all temporary or part-time, so he had no stability in his life. It was tough, especially since he was supporting his son. He still had some counterfeit money hidden in those plastic containers buried in the woods, like I mentioned before, but he didn't want to go back to using that money. He was scared it would ruin his life again. However, when his son or his son's mom needed extra financial support, he sometimes had no choice but to use it. He was trying to rebuild his relationship with his son and make up for the lost years. And in fact, their relationship did improve a lot. But in 2005, Rolling Stone magazine published a huge article about Arthur, calling him the greatest counterfeiter in the world. In the article, they said Arthur had counterfeited over $10 million. When his son read the article, he was in shock and couldn't believe it. He said to his dad, "No way. There's no way you printed over 10 million. Arthur responded, "Son, honestly, over all these years, it probably went way beyond that." His son couldn't grasp the scale of what his dad had achieved in the counterfeiting world. So, being the idiot he was, he decided to try it himself. The kid went and scanned some bills using the home scanner, then started printing them out on the computer with regular paper and a basic printer. To be fair, when I was younger, I tried that too, just out of curiosity, not to actually counterfeit anything. Anyone who's tried it, or even thought about trying it, knows that method will never produce anything close to real money. The results weren't even remotely close. When Arthur III's mom saw what he was doing, she called Arthur and told him, "Listen, your son is trying to print money at home using the computer." Arthur felt guilty and even ashamed because the Rolling Stone article had painted him in a glamorous light, even though what he did was a crime. He never imagined that the article would make his son want to follow in his footsteps. Right away, Arthur rushed home and walked into his son's room, finding the kid sitting there printing $20 bills using the home printer. At the time, his son was going through a rough patch, using drugs like Xanax, and wasn't in a good place mentally. Imagine Arthur walking in and just losing it, screaming, "Why? Why are you doing this?" So his son responded, "I'll do whatever I want. It's your fault, not mine, right? Like I can't be compared to you. You don't need the money, but I'm the one who takes care of you and spends on you, so you don't have to worry about this." The father and son got into a heated argument, their voices rising. It seemed like the son had a drug-induced episode from what he'd been using. In the end, the son grabbed the stack of counterfeit bills he'd been printing and ran out of the house. Immediately, the father chased after him. And when they got into the street, they kept arguing and yelling at each other in front of everyone. In a moment of anger, the son threw the stack of fake money at his dad. Unfortunately, a police car happened to be passing by right at that moment and saw what happened. They pulled over to check things out, and that's when Arthur said to his son, "Oh man, we're screwed. It's over." He quickly bent down to pick up the money off the ground, and when the cop came over, Arthur said, "Everything's fine, officer. This is just my son. We had a little disagreement, nothing serious." But the cop didn't leave and asked Arthur for his name. Arthur gave it to him, and the officer opened a report. At that point, Arthur knew it was over. The police and FBI agents soon arrived and shut down the whole street. Arthur was arrested, handcuffed, and made to sit on the curb. After they collected all the money, they took Arthur to the FBI office. There, a senior officer said, "Look, Arthur, we know those $20 bills weren't the issue, but that $100 bill we found in your wallet looks pretty familiar to us." Of course, it was one of the counterfeit bills Arthur still used now and then when he needed to. In the end, Arthur's case was closed. The first time he went to jail, he only got 3 years because they didn't catch him, with a lot of counterfeit money. But this time, he was caught with the same crime, and the evidence was clear and undeniable. So he was sentenced to 9 years in prison, a long and tough sentence. As for his son, Arthur III, who was only 15 at the time, he was sent to juvenile detention for a few months and then released. The FBI agents tried to get the son to testify against his dad, but he refused. For Arthur, going to prison the second time felt like the end of the line. As for his son, he went back to live with his mom for a short while, but they didn't get along, so he left to live on his own. In the following years, the son spent his time forging money. And although the counterfeit bills he made weren't professional, just scanned images, he still had a lot of customers and got plenty of orders. Over time, his equipment got better, and he ended up with more advanced tools. He wanted to follow in his dad's footsteps, so he set up a workshop, brought in printers and higher quality gear, and started printing more and more. He'd let the printers run all night, and by this time, he was 18 years old. One day, while working on a big order, printing away, a bunch of FBI agents stormed in. Arthur III was standing at the workshop door when the cops broke in, and his first instinct was to shut the door, thinking if he closed it, they wouldn't be able to get in and see what was inside. But of course, they arrested him, busted open the workshop door, and found the printer still running, spitting out fake money. The crime caught red-handed. When his father, who was still in prison, heard the news, he was shocked and heartbroken. His son had ended up in prison for counterfeiting, and he knew it was mostly his fault. If he hadn't been a counterfeiter, his son wouldn't have turned out the same. Arthur put in a request to be transferred to the same prison as his son, and after about a month, it was approved. Arthur was excited to finally see his son after all those years, even if it meant spending time together behind bars. During the years that followed, Arthur and his son became close friends and spent most of their time together, making up for the lost years. They talked about the future, their ambitions, and their plans for when they got out of prison. For Arthur, his dream had shifted to the art world. He'd been drawing even while in prison. When he was released in 2015, he started working as an artist. Most of his work reflected his life and his experience in counterfeiting. He used the same security features he'd once used in counterfeit bills, like color-changing ink, in his art pieces. He ended up selling his artwork for prices as high as $40,000 or $50,000. His life had changed completely. Instead of counterfeiting $100 bills, he was making paintings and selling them for tens of thousands. It always amazes me how people can succeed if they learn to channel their skills, talents, and abilities in the right direction. And that was the end of Arthur's story. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.